Tonight, we begin with a coup that us intelligence officials had feared, predicted, and never fully believed would happen. A seizure of power that unfolded not over months or years, but in 72 hours that rewrote the political map of the Middle East. 72 hours that ended 45 years of theocratic rule, 72 hours that sent shockwaves from Tehran to Washington. What Amir Hatami did this week crossed a line that the Revolutionary Guard had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Supreme Leader's inner circle did not hesitate. They responded with silence, surrender, and exile. For 18 months now, there had been whispers, not official statements, not public declarations, just whispers that Hatami was preparing something unprecedented. Hatami has been ambitious, yes, but he has been patient in his ambition. His moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Langley and Tel Aviv this spring was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor ERG communications know the indicators: the encrypted traffic spikes, the unusual troop rotations, the unexplained meetings between senior commanders, the sudden disappearance of key figures from public view. All of that went quiet. And whenever Iran's military establishment goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday morning, Western intelligence sources detected what they described as a coordinated military operation across Tehran, including the deployment of armored units to the Supreme Leader E's compound that had not been authorized through normal channels and over for decades. These are the kinds of military deployments that Irani's security apparatus only initiates when they are signaling something very specific: a purge, a succession crisis, or a complete transfer of power. Foreign observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Hatami was changing Iran's entire power structure. And when a former defense minister shifts the nation's military posture without explanation, even by a single battalion, the entire world pays attention. The emergency briefing issued by the White House Situation Room tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after classified session described Hatami's move as calculated, irreversible, and perhaps most importantly, executed with the consent of key ERG commanders, but a coup only works if the target hesitates. Khamenei did. In fact, his response this week was among the most delayed and disorganized we've seen in the history of Islamic Republic power struggles. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of Hatami's forces surrounding the Supreme Leader's residence, Khamenei was placed on an aircraft bound for an undisclosed location. This wasn't the orderly transition many had anticipated. This was a forced exile, a removal that the new regime only executes when they are preparing to consolidate total control. Regional analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Hatami is preparing a pivot toward the West and economic normalization. Another is that Hatami is attempting to consolidate nationalist military rule while maintaining anti-Western rhetoric. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Hatami is attempting to accelerate Iran's nuclear program without clerical oversight or restraint. But today, the international community took that card off the table. They didn't ignore the transition. They didn't immediately embrace Hatami. They didn't dismiss the nuclear concerns. They demanded immediate IAEA access to all Iranian nuclear facilities as a condition for recognition. What we're watching now is a test of Iranian institutional resilience. Hatami wants to see whether he can govern without clerical legitimacy. The Iranian people want to show whether they will accept military rule. The United States wants to prevent nuclear proliferation under a new, unpredictable regime, and Israel wants to prevent any continuation of Iran's regional proxy strategy. Tonight, we've heard from sources inside Tehran who are now monitoring popular reaction in major cities. They say the streets are quiet, not with fear, but with anticipation. They say many Iranians are cautiously hopeful that theocratic rule has finally ended. And they say Hatami's decision to remove Khamenei rather than harm him is likely part of a legitimacy strategy intended to prevent martyrdom narratives. But the region is not relaxing. In fact, every major power is repositioning assets and recalculating alliances. Their response today, measured, coordinated, and watchful, sent a message to Hatami that the world is watching every move he makes, and it sent a message to the Iranian people that the international community will engage with whoever can deliver stability. As the crisis goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the Supreme Leader's inner circle hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Hatami's move was decisive. It ended 45 years of theocratic rule. It redrew the power map of the Middle East, and it created both unprecedented opportunity and unprecedented risk. What happens next will depend on what Hatami does in the next 72 hours. If he opens dialogue with the West and allows international inspections, this moment will be remembered as the Iranian Spring. If he consolidates authoritarian military rule, the international community has already shown they are prepared for containment. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in 45 years, the Islamic Republic appears to be finished. Calm is quiet, too quiet. And when Iran's clerical establishment is quiet, it means they are calculating their survival. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the guardians of the revolution learned something they never believed possible: military power can override religious authority, popular exhaustion can paralyze resistance, and one determined commander can reshape a nation overnight. This story is far from over, but tonight, one thing is clear: Ayatollah Khamenei is no longer in Iran. Amir Hatami is in control, and the Middle East will never be the same. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds. This wasn't just a palace coup. This wasn't just a military takeover. This was a systematic dismantling of theocratic infrastructure. This was a reconstitution of Iranian state power. And reconstitution is the one thing the Islamic Republic has struggled to prevent since the 2009 Green Movement protests. For every internal security measure they have made, reformist elements have countered with something that exposed deeper fractures within the system. Remember, the Revolutionary Guard thought they had eliminated all internal threats. They thought the military was subordinate to clerical authority. They thought no single commander could ever consolidate enough power to challenge the supreme leader. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Amir Hatami has consolidated control of all major military branches. Clerical authorities have been sidelined or detained. The supreme leader is in exile, his location unknown even to allied governments. What makes this moment so unprecedented and so dangerous is that Khamenei's removal happened at a time when Iran is under extraordinary pressure. Hardliners want confrontation with the West. Reformists want economic normalization. The URG wants to preserve its economic empire. Ordinary Iranians want an end to international isolation. Khamenei was balancing these demands while his health deteriorated and succession planning stalled. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure, they're doing it from vulnerability. The State Department's emergency statement, now being circulated to all diplomatic missions, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to see Iran descend into civil war. Senior officials said plainly that Hatami's seizure of power was inconsistent with constitutional governance and international norms. That is diplomatic language for, we didn't authorize this, but we're not going to stop it either. You don't usually hear that tone from Foggy Bottom unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Amir Hatami addressed the Iranian nation in a calm, measured speech tonight. He said, "The era of divided authority has ended. Iran will now speak with one voice." He said, "We do not seek conflict with any nation. We seek only the restoration of Iranian dignity." And he said, "Those who served the previous system with honor have nothing to fear. Those who abuse their power will answer to the people." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a military commander that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Hatami's latest move wasn't isolated, along with the removal of Khamenei's force. Commanders also were detained or placed under house arrest. The Guardian Council suspended all activities indefinitely. Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon increased emergency communications, targeting URG handlers seeking instructions. All of this happened within the same 48 hours. When a new Iranian regime moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Tonight, Iranian state media, now under new management, confirmed that Hatami's forces launched coordinated operations on Revolutionary Guard command centers, including the URG intelligence headquarters that had recently been fortified for what analysts believe was an anticipated internal threat. Hatami neutralized opposition commanders before Khamenei's loyalists could mount a counter-operation. They secured the state broadcasting center. They secured the nuclear command infrastructure. They secured the paramilitary Basij headquarters that were likely preparing to defend the supreme leader. In other words, Hatami targeted the nervous system of theocratic control, the communication and command apparatus that would have made resistance operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Khamenei's removal wasn't just symbolic, it was irreversible. It represented the kind of move that could destabilize the entire region if left unchecked, and the international community, understanding that, fully responded with caution. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't issue immediate condemnations. They didn't threaten military intervention. They opened back-channel communications with Hatami's representatives. They positioned naval assets in the Persian Gulf as a precaution. And here's where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Intelligence analysts now believe that Hatami's latest move was designed to exploit the fragility of Khamenei's succession planning after years of failed attempts to consolidate clerical authority. Hatami wanted to see whether the clerical establishment would rally behind the 85-year-old supreme leader. But instead, the opposite happened. The assembly of experts didn't mobilize in defense. They remained silent with a coordination that was so immediate, so unified, that even Khamenei's closest advisors noticed. You don't get Iran's clerical establishment to stay quiet easily, but this week, Hatami did. Regional analysts speaking with Reuters under anonymity described the regime's collapse as a controlled demolition, a way to preserve Irani's state institutions while removing theocratic oversight. But the international community proved today that they remain both cautious and engaged. Their diplomatic responses were not only measured, they were coordinated so precisely that Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States issued near-identical statements within the same hour. That coordination matters because it shows pre-existing contingency planning. It shows that Western intelligence is not reacting blindly. They are monitoring a scenario they had war-gamed for years. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Hatami's operation. The Artesh regular military carried out a complete lockdown of Tehran's governmental district, forcing all clerical officials to remain in their residences. Cyber warfare units targeted URG communication networks that had been upgraded in the last 18 months. Naval forces operating in the Strait of Hormuz reportedly secured all Iranian port facilities used by the Quds Force to coordinate regional operations. What makes this moment so volatile and so dangerous is that Hatami's latest move happened at a time when Khamenei is under immense health pressure. Hardliners want a crackdown. Reformists want a transition. The army wants more funding. The URG wants total control. Khamenei is balancing these demands while dying of cancer. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Hatami thought the center was weak. He was wrong. The state security incident statement, now scrolling on Iran TV, was designed to signal that the regime is not willing to allow anarchy. Officials said plainly that Hatami's actions were inconsistent with the path of the imam, that is clerical language for, "We are going to kill you and your family." You don't usually hear that tone from Tehran unless the throne is literally shaking. Meanwhile, Khamenei's audio message addressed the nation in a shaky, defiant recording. "Tonight," he said, "the traitors have shown their faces." He said, "The revolution is stronger than their tanks." And he said, "There will be no mercy." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from an 85-year-old man who just stared down the barrel of a gun held by his own defense minister. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Hatami's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the tanks in Tehran, Hezbollah in Lebanon went dark on Qums. The Houthis in Yemen didn't post victory clips today. Russian advisors at the Natanz facility were evacuated. All of this happened within the same hour. When Hatami moved multiple pieces at once, it means something larger was underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Hatami was working for the West to destabilize the regime. Another is that he was working for a rival hardline faction to oust Khamenei. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that he was trying to surrender the nuclear program to the U.S. in exchange for power. But today, the URG took that card off the table. They didn't negotiate. They didn't wait. They didn't talk. They shot him. What we're watching now is a test of loyalty. Hatami wanted to see if the army would fire on the URG. The URG wants to show that they are the only true power. Israel wants to prevent the nukes from going missing, and the CIA wants to prevent a civil war with loose nukes. Tonight, we've heard from sources inside the Evin prison who are now moving high-value inmates. They say Hatami is captured. They say he was wounded, and they say his decision to act alone is likely part of a delusion of grandeur intended to make him the next supreme leader, but the URG is not showing mercy. In fact, the URG is broadcasting executions. Their response today, swift, brutal, and absolute, sent a message to the generals that the old guard is still in charge, and it sent a message to the world that the regime is more dangerous when it's wounded. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Hatami hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the URG's reaction was timely. It saved Khamenei, it saved the nuclear chain of command, and it saved the regime from itself. What happens next will depend on what the army does in the next 24 hours. If they stand down, this moment will be remembered as a failed coup. If they rebel, the URG have already shown they are ready for a civil war. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in 40 years, the army appears to be the enemy of the state. Tehran is quiet, too quiet. And when Tehran is quiet, it means the firing squads are lining up. It means they are choosing the next defense minister carefully. Because tonight, the generals learned something they have learned many times. You can buy tanks, you can buy uniforms, but you cannot buy loyalty. This story is far from over, but tonight, one thing is clear: the Ayatollah survived, the general did not, and the bloodletting has just begun, and we will be here watching every detail as the purges unfold.